Good morning. Our opening words today are from UU Minister Pat Uribe-Lichty. We come together with our tired minds and bodies, with our confusion and questions, our uncertainties and our fears. We come together with our hopes, with our pasts and our ideas, our passions and our faith. We come together bringing all of who we are, trusting that in gathering we will be renewed, and that together we can create the world we long for.
Our opening hymn is Break Not the Circle. The number is in your order of service. I invite you to rise in body or in spirit to join in singing. Welcome to First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian Universalist congregation where we gather as people with diverse beliefs and spiritual practices, with a shared commitment to bringing more love, more peace, more generosity, and more justice into this world. Whoever you are and whoever you love, whether you worship one God, many gods, or no God, you are welcome here. We welcome our visitors here in person or on Zoom and invite you to connect further with us by either filling out a blue card in person or the link online in Zoom. We have a nursery downstairs to welcome any little ones who might not find it as fun to be in the worship service. But unfortunately, we were not able to find a second volunteer today to staff our nursery to our safe congregations policy. So if you do need to bring a child to the nursery, we ask that you stay with your child. We are working on going to hire someone in the future to avoid this problem, so don't worry. But in the meantime, if you ever do want to sign up to volunteer in the nursery, you can do that too, as a stopgap. We have quite a few announcements in your order of worship. You can see what's coming up today, what's coming up soon, These are exciting things: games, a Halloween spooktacular, a folk music concert, so check that out. One correction, it says you have to sign up today for the small group ministry if you want to do the 6-month small groups, and that's because I said that, but since I said it, I'm going to change it. I'm not going to actually sort out the groups till Tuesday anyway, so you can sign up anytime before Tuesday, today or tomorrow. And one last announcement. This next Sunday, the 27th, at 4 p.m. at the Carlton Willard Village Auditorium, there will be a short play called It Can't Happen Here Again. It explores fascism in the past and in the present. It was presented previously to great effect, so you are warmly welcome and invited to join at Carlton Willard. And lastly, I heard that someone very special might have been born today in the past, and I was wondering if we might sing happy birthday to him. If you don't know, that's our music director, Brad Connor. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Brad. Happy birthday to you. I figure might as well take advantage of that choir as much as we can and sing that song well, you know? On that note, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join in our unison affirmation in English and in Spanish in your order of worship. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en espíritu de amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. You may be seated. And I am going to need a little bit of assistance this morning for our time for all ages. So if I could get any kids or youth or even young at heart people to join me, I'm going to be reading a picture book, and I will need someone to hold the picture book, and I also will need maybe 1 or 2 people to help explain some of the pictures so that people who can't see the pictures can hear about what's going on in the book. All right, I know you're ready to help. Do I have any other volunteers? Volunteers? Yes, thank you. Thank you. Come on down. Come on down. There's some wrangling happening. Anybody? Anybody? There's some enthusiasm, but that one might be a little young. Yeah? Yeah, you want to hold the book? Excellent. I got a volunteer. This book is called Stuck by Oliver Jeffers. If you can hold it and show the photos, and try not to block the view, but maybe when I ask, you can tell people what's going on in the photos. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
This is a tree with a kite, and a guy's holding a kite.
All right. It all began when Floyd's kite became stuck in a tree. He tried pulling and swinging, but it wouldn't come unstuck. The trouble really began when he threw his favorite shoe to knock the kite loose.
He's taking off his shoe and throwing it at the tree.
Okay, wait. But we got one more thing here. And that got stuck too. So he threw up his other shoe to knock down his favorite one, and unbelievably that got stuck as well. In order to knock down his other shoe, Floyd fetched Mitch. Who's Mitch?
The cat.
Mitch is a cat. Uh-oh. Cats get stuck in trees all the time, but this was getting ridiculous. Floyd fetched a ladder. He was going to sort this out once and for all. What do you think he's going to do with the ladder?
I think that he's going to climb up it, but instead, he threw it up the tree.
And he threw it! He threw it! I'm sure you can guess what happened.
It got stuck.
The ladder was borrowed from a neighbor and would definitely need to be put back before everyone noticed. And in order to do it, Floyd flung a bucket of paint at it. But wouldn't you know it, the bucket of paint got stuck. Then Floyd tried.
Wonder what's next.
A duck to knock down the bucket of paint. A chair to knock down the duck. His friend's bicycle to knock down the chair. This is reminding me of an old lady who swallowed a fly. The kitchen sink to knock down his friend's bicycle. Floyd's front door to knock down the kitchen sink.
And they all got stuck up there.
The family car to knock down the front door. The milkman to knock down the family car. And the milkman is saying, "Did you all get up here the same way?" An orangutan to knock down the milkman, who surely had somewhere else to be. And what do we see in the tree?
I see, I see all of the things he threw that got stuck.
All of the things are in the tree. A small boat to knock down the orangutan, a big boat to knock down the small boat, a rhinoceros to knock down the big boat, a long-distance truck to knock down the rhinoceros, a house across the street to knock down the long-distance truck. Someone in the house is saying, "Floyd?"
And who's Floyd?
The little boy.
Oh, yeah, the little boy.
The little boy is Floyd, yeah. A lighthouse to knock down the larger house across the street. A curious whale in the wrong place at the wrong time to knock down the lighthouse.
How many things is he going to buoy up this tree? 5 million.
And they all got stuck. What does it look like?
A mess, right?
Big mess.
A big mess.
And the whale's gonna run out of air.
Yes, the whale might have a hard time in a tree. A fire engine was passing and heard all the commotion. The firemen stopped to see if they could help at all, and up they went. First the engine, followed by the firemen, one by one. And there they stayed, stuck between the orangutan and one of the boats. Firemen would definitely be noticed missing, and Floyd knew he'd be in big trouble.
The fireman got
Then he had an idea and went to find a saw. What do you think he might do with the saw?
I think he's gonna cut the tree, but instead, he threw the saw.
He lined it up as best he could and hurled it up the tree.
How many things is this tree going to hold?
I don't know.
And that was it. There was no more room left in the tree, and the kite came unstuck. Pop! Floyd was delighted. He had forgotten all about his kite and put it to use immediately, enjoying the rest of his day very much. That night, Floyd fell asleep, exhausted. Though before he did, he could have sworn there was something he was forgetting. And what do you see?
Hang on a minute, lads. I've got a great idea.
Everybody's still in the tree. Thank you. Thank you to my assistants. So today we're talking about repair, trying to make things better. And we're talking about how to know when to try to make things better. And perhaps Floyd might have stopped to think about how to make things better, because every time he tried to fix his last mistake, he made something worse and worse and worse. He could have used things to get the kite, but he threw everything in the tree. So we're going to keep examining that idea and figure out how we can be a little smarter than Floyd and not keep getting more and more of our problems stuck. But with that, I'm going to invite our kids and youth to go to their faith development classes. Pre-K through 5 is downstairs. 6th and 7th is upstairs for building bridges, and we'll sing them out. Great.
Good morning. My name is Marge Heckman, and I'm a member of the lay pastoral team here at First Parish. At this time in the service, we invite anyone who would like to come forward and light a candle of joy or concern to do so. And I'll light one candle for anyone on Zoom who may have a joy or concern. And also, it represents all those joys and concerns that we keep in our hearts. I will remain at the candle stand after the service if anyone would like to light a candle in private.
Now for something a little different. From the time I was a little girl, I fought with my mother. This didn't go well. She would get mad. I would get frustrated, and more often than not, I got the wrong end of the stick, literally. An iconic moment in our long struggle took place when I was in my 40s, when I returned to apologize after a flaming row about my visiting a friend. "I'm sorry I argued," I said, determined to be the bigger person. "I'm sorry too," Mom replied. And for an instant, the fabric of space-time ruptured. Never had she made an apology to me. Was this a miracle? A turning point in our relationship? She continued, "Because I didn't deserve it." It took me years of therapy to learn that some relationships just can't be fixed. But I want to take a minute today to talk about my relationship with my father, which did get repaired in a way I didn't really appreciate right away. My father had a drinking problem. To this day, I'm tempted to minimize it. He never lost his job or put us in physical danger. I don't think he drank to excess every day. But seeing your parent so inebriated he can barely get up 3 steps to the kitchen, speak coherently, or find his way to the bathroom is not a pretty sight. Waking up in the middle of the night to a raging row between him and my mother was truly frightening. By the time I was a teenager, the family stress around my father's drinking drove me into the office of my school chaplain, where I sobbed out my worries and exhaustion. The young priest, Father Richard Coleman, set in place what did become a miracle and a repair. "Ask your father to take you to Alateen," he said, "and tell him you'd like him to go to AA." Alateen didn't work for me. There were too many kids there with parents in prison or no food on the table, so my problems drew no attention. But in AA, my father found his people. Not all at once, not without backslides, but for the long haul, he stopped drinking. Among the 12 steps of AA recovery, there is a reference to moral inventory and making amends. I always thought of these things as involving words like, "I'm sorry," and "how can I fix this?" But my father was a man of few words. Perhaps you'll be surprised to hear that we never talked about his drinking or his abstinence. He never apologized. I never thanked him. But he showed up. When I had my first car accident with his car, he didn't admonish me. When my mother refused to replace my worn-out boots, he took me shopping. When my best friend's father died and my mother asked me why I was so upset, he hugged me. When I planned to spend 6 weeks at home before my wedding, but the fights became unbearable, he drove me to the airport. When he lay dying from a cerebral hemorrhage and was surely unconscious, he hung on until Mom and I had completed the funeral arrangements, until I felt I had to return to my husband and preschool son, since there was nothing more I could do there except fight with my mother. I got home in the afternoon, and he died that evening. I felt heartbroken and stupid to have abandoned him so very close to his end. Yet, in retrospect, his hanging on until I left meant that I didn't have to subordinate my grief to my mother's, and didn't have to deal with relatives I hadn't seen in years who came to the hospital to support her. I got to lie in my bed in my husband's arms that night, wailing that I wanted my daddy. What a gift he had given me, one last time. I returned the next day, fortified by and with my family, and planted an imprint of my burgundy lipstick on his cold, embalmed forehead. That, dear friends, is a story of repair.
I am grateful that in this community, we strive toward repair. That in this community, we invite people to bring their full stories and their full selves. That in this community, we come together, imperfect people, with all of our hurts and all that we have done, and say, let's be better together. I invite you to give generously to this morning's offering to sustain the ministry of this congregation.
Our reading this morning is taken from On Repentance and Repair by Danya Rutenberg. The work of repentance demands curiosity, care, and a willingness to face hard things with bravery and honesty. While we can't undo the past, we can address the present with integrity and endeavor to create a future that is much more whole than anything we can imagine from here. Addressing harm is possible only when we bravely face the gap between the story we tell ourselves, the one in which we're the hero, fighting the good fight, doing our best, behaving responsibly and appropriately in every context, and the reality of our actions. We need to summon the courage to cross the bridge over that cognitively dissonant gulf and face who we are, who we have been, even if it threatens our story of ourselves. It's the only way we can even begin to undertake any possible repair of the harm we've done and become the kind of person who might do better next time. And that, the writer concludes, in my opinion, is what's truly heroic.
If you, like me, had an elementary school-aged kid in your life in 2021, you might, like me, know every single word to the song "We Don't Talk About Bruno." No, no, no. A song where they sing a lot about how they don't talk about Bruno. This song is from the hit Disney movie Encanto, a movie about a Colombian family with magical powers and how that family faced a crisis. Spoiler alert, I will talk about the ending. Hopefully you've seen it if you want to by now. In this film, the grandmother of the family, the matriarch, realizes by the end of the movie that her high expectations for her family that came from her own background of trauma and her own fear for what might happen have shaped an environment that have hurt her family, that have put too much pressure on her grandchildren and children, and that have caused one of her grandchildren, who didn't get her special magical powers when she came of age, to feel a lot of pain. And so, after the climax of the film, when their magical house has been destroyed and their magical candle flame has gone out, the grandmother is able to realize where she went wrong, share her own pain with her granddaughter, and they are able to repair their relationship, rebuild their house, and regain their magical powers. It's a beautiful example of how trauma in one generation can be passed down to subsequent generations. However, in reality, it's a little less common that we have such a climactic moment where the house has turned to rubble and the candle flame has gone out, and suddenly someone realizes the pain they've caused and what they've done wrong and are able to suddenly face it. In reality, these kinds of situations tend to be less like a Disney movie and more like what Maria described. Sometimes there's intractable conflict. Sometimes there is harm that never gets an "I'm sorry." Sometimes there is repair. And sometimes it doesn't go acknowledged. Other times it may be more words than action, and you may wish that the action followed the words more. The Rabbi Danya Rutenberg, who wrote the book on repentance and repair that our reading was taken from, has in her book 5 steps to repairing relationship. And she lays out these 5 steps. She talks about step 1 being that we acknowledge what happened. She says it doesn't have to be an apology yet, it's just acknowledging what happened. That step number 2 is that the person who is acknowledging what happened and trying to repair the situation will use the tools they have to transform themselves. That they might do something like go to AA or go to therapy or learn more about sexism or racism or delve more into their own pain to figure out what they need to do differently. And then step 3 is to make amends, to try to do what needs to be done to make the situation better, to make the victim feel better, to do the actions that can help to repair. Step 4 is apology. All the way to step 4, that's when we get an apology. And then step 5 is to not do it anymore, not do it again. And this is a beautiful outline of repair. And maybe you can think of times in your life when you have either gone through some of those steps or experienced someone going through some of those steps, whether they had a prescribed list or not. We can intuit that these ingredients are the ingredients we need to repair things. We need to acknowledge, we need to change, we need to do better, we need to apologize. But often, we aren't in a situation where these steps all play out nicely. One thing that is often different between Ruttenberg's system and reality is that in her system, there is clarity that there is someone who has done harm and someone else who has been harmed. But I will say that often in my experience, conflicts don't quite fit that mold. So often in a conflict, both parties feel wronged or harmed. Neither one feels like they are completely the harm doer. In fact, they both might say the other person is the harm doer, or maybe they both can admit, I did some harm, I also was hurt. But it's usually not so clear-cut. And because so often what happened is contested, step 1, the very first step, is often not possible, acknowledging what happened. If both people have different stories about what happened, it's very hard to even begin the process. Also, even if the process can be begun, sometimes step 2 is inaccessible. Maybe someone doesn't have the tools or resources or support they need to make a transformation. Step 3 could be on someone's means or be beyond someone's will. They might not be able to make the amends, or they might not be willing to do what it would take for the other person to feel that that has been repaired. And sometimes step 5 is unrealistic. I know that I've spent much of my life endeavoring to never make some certain kind of error again, and I usually do make some certain kind of error again, especially when the error is something about forgetfulness or overbooking my schedule or overpromising. That's somewhere I go wrong a lot. And you might be thinking of your own traps you step in over and over and think, I'm going to do it differently next time, only to find you did it again. So given that this beautiful and powerful model is not one we can always follow perfectly, how do we know what is enough? How do we know when to trust our own story of what happened, or when to re-examine the story? Even if, as it said in our reading, this might threaten our story of ourselves, threaten our story of who we are. How do we know when to give up on repair completely, or give something some time to heal, or dive in and try to make things right? We don't want to end up like Floyd in Stuck, throwing problem after problem into the same tree and getting nothing any better. Sometimes when it comes to relationships, we use the words repair and heal somewhat interchangeably. We want to repair a relationship, we want to heal a relationship. But when we use those terms in other parts of life, we use them rather differently. We might repair a car, we might let our body heal, for example. And I think it is useful to consider these terms and what they might mean when they are applied to relationship. I think repair is a proactive process that requires tools. And that healing is a more passive process that needs a supportive environment. And you can imagine that to repair a relationship, it does mean there has to be an engagement, an active engagement in process. To heal a relationship or to heal your own hurts, you might need supportive care, you might need time, and you might need some types of healing support, the way you would think of supporting a body with maybe nourishing food or tea or rest, things like that. But either way, whether we're talking about the proactive process of repair or we're talking about leaning into healing, in either way, we need to know what is the diagnosis, what is the problem. Because we cannot repair things that we are in denial about, and we cannot heal something that we are resisting with our mind and our heart. And I think that is a place that a lot of us get stuck, speaking of getting stuck. A lot of us, I think, and myself very much included, get stuck on acceptance. Acceptance can mean a lot of different things, but in this case, I don't mean that something is okay. I simply mean accepting that it did happen and that we did have the feelings we had about it. I will say that I tend to try to avoid this part of any process. Facing my own hurt or facing harm I've done can be very painful. And oftentimes, I will try to just jump to the end of the process, which is one way to avoid acceptance. Let's just apologize and try to forget it ever happened. Let's just say, oh, well, I figured out a new system and I won't ever do that again, and so it's all going to be fine, and we're going to ignore that it happened. You may be thinking, oh, yes, I do that too, or oh, yes, I know someone who does that. So that's one way we can avoid acceptance, is simply by trying to fix it too quickly. But there can be other ways that we resist accepting something that happened, whether we were hurt or we hurt someone else or both. One can be minimizing, and that can go in either direction. It can be minimizing in a way of like, well, yeah, I mean, I made that joke, but it wasn't a big deal, and people are so sensitive. Or it can be minimizing what happened to you. Like, well, I know he was kind of mean, but, it wasn't that big of a deal. Similarly, there could be justification, where you acknowledge that you did something, but you had a good reason. Oh, I know, I did get really upset, but I'd had such a stressful day, and I'd been through this and that and the other thing. Or you might justify what someone else did, saying, oh, yeah, they did totally forget about how they were supposed to, come over or support me, but, oh, they had a lot going on, and this and that happened. Another way we can resist is just by staying in a reactive place. Because sometimes staying really reactive is a way to avoid deeper pain. Staying really angry, like, oh my gosh, can you believe that happened? I can't believe it. How could they do that? How could they say that? Can be a way to avoid, ouch, that really hurt that they said that. And similarly with being reactive in a defensive manner. How could they say I did that? Why would they accuse me of that? Why would they make a big deal out of that? Can be a way to avoid, ooh, I feel bad that I did that thing. And there's also the possibility that we might retreat into a familiar but upsetting story. It's sort of counterintuitive, but sometimes we avoid pain by finding other pain that we're a little more familiar with. We might retreat into a story like, I'm a horrible person, or this relationship is ruined, or everyone always lets me down. I'm always screwing up. I really can't trust anyone. While these stories can feel sort of like a refuge, they can also cause a lot of pain, and it's not the kind of pain that we're processing through. Ultimately, if we can get to acceptance, I did harm, I feel guilt, I feel sad, I feel regret, I feel anger. I was harmed, I feel fear, I feel anger, hurt or betrayal, or both at once. I did harm and was harmed. Then we have the possibility to move forward. And I think that it is a really courageous thing to do to allow our story of self to change. In our reading, it was clear that Ruttenberg was advising this for the harm doer, saying, don't get so stuck in your story that you always do it right, that you avoid acknowledging what you might have done wrong. But I think this can apply actually on any side of the equation. Sometimes our story of self is, I had a fine childhood, or my marriage is okay, and that's preventing us from acknowledging hurt that was done to us. Sometimes the story of self is, I'm not racist, or I'm a thoughtful person, and that might be preventing us from acknowledging something we did. Other times it's, I'm too strong to be hurt by something like that, as a way to avoid the hurt we feel, or I'm too smart to make such a stupid mistake, as a way to avoid admitting something we did. But if we have the courage to change these stories, we can do something really tremendous, as our reading suggested. We can create a world that is more whole than we can even imagine. And sometimes the stories that we are committed to are collective stories. Sometimes they're stories like, this is a wonderful country founded on freedom. Or our church is a liberal church where people don't do things like that. Or I know this group of people are the good guys. When we cling to those types of stories, as a country or as a society, that prevents us from doing larger scale repair. One example is the practice of reparations that was discussed earlier this month at the Spirit of Democracy. And issues like this is why, even though it can sometimes seem formulaic or forced, even a bit farcical without the action of amends, it can be important to do things like land acknowledgements, where we say what happened. It's that first step, that owning that there was a grave injustice in our past. So acceptance is a big step, and it's a key step, whether we're going to pause at acceptance, move into healing, or attempt a repair process. But still, how do we know? How do we know if we should attempt repair? I don't think there's any way to perfectly know. I've certainly written people off and then later realized that they had transformed. And I have also gone in good faith into a process only to be let down. And I imagine you have had similar experiences in your own lives. It is not possible to perfectly judge whether repair is going to work. But I would suggest the following as a bit of a checklist to run through. 1, have I accepted what happened? And as we just discussed, that's a big one. Have I really accepted what happened? Not that it's okay, but just that it did happen. Number 2, have I done the healing I can do on my end? Because this is important, whether we did hurt and harm to another or whether we were harmed or both. It can be important to heal from our hurt so we're not in a really reactive place when we go into a repair process. And it can be important to heal from past hurts that might be influencing how we reacted. because it's often true that trauma from our past finds its way into present conflict, and things will go much better in the repair if we can do more healing around what happened in the past, so we're not dragging it into what is happening now. The third question is, what risks are there in attempting this repair? What are the risks? Is there a power differential in this relationship you're trying to repair? Could you end up getting fired or ostracized from a community, cut out of your family? Could addressing this conflict lead to more pain that you're not ready to take on? What are the risks? Number 4, am I willing to make amends if you believe that your amends will be called for? And do I know what I need for amends if you're going to ask the other person to make amends? Do you know what you need, and do you feel willing to make amends? And lastly, if this goes poorly, do I have a plan for either continuing with accountability or healing on my end? Do I have resources available to me, community members, a therapist, good friends, some types of support in place so that if it goes poorly, I have a way to move forward? Now, when we consider these questions, it's also important to know our own tendencies. Because some of us like to fix things. Some of us are fixers. We really want to make things right, and we want things to be okay. And in fact, it might make us very anxious when things are not okay. And you may know people like that. You may be people like that. And you may be aware that sometimes people are so intent on fixing that they meddle where they're not needed, or they push too hard. And so if you find that tendency in yourself, you might really, as you run through this checklist, also try to ease back a little bit. Say, maybe I'll take a little extra time. But maybe you're not like that. Maybe you have a tendency to just want to avoid the hard conversations. Maybe you're like, I don't want to even talk about it. Let's pretend it never happened. Another common human experience I can certainly relate to. If you find yourself moving in that direction, maybe you want to actually challenge yourself to move into the process, to take the risk, if that's not the path you usually take. And if we realize repair is not going to be possible, or it just seems too risky and we don't feel ready, then that is a time to pursue healing and acceptance. And that might also be a time for boundaries, or a time to change some of our own practices. Because we cannot control what other people do, but we can control what we do and where we put ourselves for the most part. And so that is part of our process on our end. If we cannot repair, we can do our best to heal, and we can do our best to protect ourselves with boundaries. Like, I'm not going to go to social events with that person for now. Or if that person starts yelling or raising their voice, I'm going to leave the situation. These are examples of boundaries. There is a lot in this topic that is hard, that is heavy, because all of us have been hurt by others, and all of us have hurt others, and all of us participate in a society that causes great harm. Even when we are trying to change that harm, we know it is happening. We know there is great injustice. And so I want to close on a hopeful note. Because the possibility for repair is a miraculous thing. And it does happen all the time. Think about how often you get mad at a loved one, maybe a spouse or a child or a sibling, someone close to you, and how often you're able to say, "Oh, I'm sorry I was like that." And they say, "That's okay, I understand," and you do repair. It's a sweet and beautiful and powerful thing. And it might not restore our magic powers like the people of Encanto, but I do think that it can do incredible things. And the more possibility we create for repair, the less we focus on punishment and blame, and the more we focus on real accountability and repair, the more our society will be transformed. I do believe that. As Ruttenberg writes, while we can't undo the past, we can address the present with integrity and endeavor to create a future that is much more whole than anything we can imagine from here. That is much more whole than anything we can even imagine right now, simply by creating the possibility to repair harm. So to that I say, hallelujah.
The final hymn is another hymn that you might not know, but you know what? It's very tuneful. So please stand in either body or spirit and let's learn this hymn together. Page 125, From the Crush of Wealth and Power.
In the spirit of the Serenity Prayer, may we find in our communities, in ourselves, and in our spiritual practices the serenity to accept what has happened. May we find in our communities, ourselves, and in our spiritual practices the courage to attempt repair when it is possible. And may we find in ourselves, our communities, and our spiritual practices the wisdom to find our way between acceptance and repair. Amen.